Hey, welcome everyone. Just some quick housekeeping things. We are going to be monitoring the muting portion of this. So if you want to talk, it would be best for you to raise your hand first. And so just so that way we know you're trying to stop us and keep going, just so then that way we can make sure that there's as few interruptions as possible. So just know that we're going to be monitoring that. And so if you don't want to be muted, just make sure you raise your hand. Two is that if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. We will go ahead and you can go ahead and turn that off. And so unless you want to be on our video when we post it online. So that's great. So that's the next thing. And then we do recommend that, we could recommend it, I guess. We will take questions throughout the whole training, so please stop us. Again, just raise your hand. I have all the people up here, and so we can go ahead and make sure that we catch your question while we're going along. So then that way we don't forget to have that answered, okay? So at that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. We're going to talk about the operation budgets portion of the HOME-ARP application. And so we are going to do a quick project overview just to get started. And then we're going to go through some posted questions and a website review real quick. And then talk about those organizational budgets and then some key takeaways. So that's going to be the focus of our talks today. So just to remind everyone, we're looking at probably right around $87 million it's $87 million as a whole, $8.7 million for the non-congregate shelter. I think in this first round, I think we may be doing a portion of that, but we may be doing more. We were considering about $4 million, but moving that up if we need to, depending on the applications we get in. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this. So we're being positive and yet also cautious at the same time. So just know that that's part of the application process. The part of non-congregate shelter are shelters for individuals who are homeless or at risk of homeless. And this is not a program where we have a lease. So just know that if you're wanting to get a lease or some kind of agreement with individuals who are participating, that they will that's not a part of the non-congregate shelter program. This is also a community-driven process. We highly, highly, highly recommend that you have lots of people that are on your team to make this work, and that includes individuals who refer people to be in your program, as well as support those people once they are in your program. So just know that this community-driven process is also a big part of the non-congregate shelter development. And we're also looking at data. So make sure you have data to back up all of the information and reasoning for your shelter. So let's take a look at some posted questions that we've had recently. All very good questions. And so the online application page, once you guys get this particular PowerPoint presentation, you can click on this. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is put this here, so then that way we can talk about it. The application page is you can just go ahead and search HOME-ARP, just like I have here. And then the HOME-ARP page should come up. And then our application page is just the first link here. I know most of you have probably already found this, which is why you're here to begin with. I'm just going through just in case for those additional individuals who have questions. If you would like to submit a question or a comment, you can do it here, and this goes to our form. And this allows you to ask a question, so please go ahead and do that, or make a comment for that matter. And then here are the list of trainings along with the registration links. And then once they're completed, where you can access the recording and the PowerPoint. Okay, so that just is a general overview. What I want to talk about here, because we've had some questions around submissions. So we have 2 submission dates. One is August 15th. The other is September 15th. Okay, so as you can see here, these say phase 1 submission here to the left, excuse me, the right, and then phase 2 submission. Okay, so phase 1 submission, so that's your data and SWOT Excel files, your operation budget training, your NCS development overview, and your NCS development budget. They're all going to be submitted in this first submission time, August 15th. Now, that date, you also, there's a $200 application fee, which is noted in the manual to submit by then as well. And we'll go through that real quick too. Then the phase 2 submission is here on September 15th. Okay, so what I'm going to do, because we've had these questions, and also Kelly brought up, and Kelly's unable to make it today. So if you're hoping to talk with her, we can connect with you guys next week with Kelly, because she'll be available then. But on August 10th, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in here an additional kind of catch-up training. I didn't put anything there to allow you guys time to complete all the information and not hyperventilate before it's all due. So however, for August 10th, so keeping the every Thursday at 1 pattern that we have, adding one that talks about the self-scoring. So to make sure you kind of understand that. So going through each of the Excel workbooks and self-scoring. And then also talking about how to package your submissions. Okay. If this is something that,
don't press buttons, don't press buttons. Wait a minute.
Okay. Sharika, did you want to ask okay, so she went back on mute. Okay. Does this sound like a good thing to all of you? Because what I'm hearing is that there's some confusion. The way that we've done this is actually very typical with what we do with the Housing Finance Department. So there was a bit of understanding that, so that's where we're kind of getting all these ideas from. It's not a traditional application process with regards to other forms of grants. Okay, so, but it is consistent with what we do for the most part with our Housing Finance Department. So that's where the connection is. Scheduling something for the 10th, if y'all could raise your hand and say, yes, this is what I would love. This would be great. Raise your hands. Okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we'll schedule something for the 10th. That's great. So you guys can go ahead and put your hands down. So that's the first thing. Okay, so and we'll go through that then. Awesome. Okay. We talked about the manual. Okay, so once you guys download the application packet, so the packet can be found here. Once you download it and you upload, opening the file. Okay. So once it's open, in this first section here, under the overview documents, that's where the manual is located, right here. Okay. And once you click on that, the first portion of the manual is something I highly recommend that you read through. The whole manual is good to look over, but this part goes over all the requirements as far as what the awards are going to be, the eligible applicants, the activities we can do, leveraged funds, and then it talks about the application fee that I mentioned. And then it also has an overview of the trainings and such. So take a look at this. If you have further questions, let us know. But again, that's at the beginning of the manual. So take a look at that. It's in the first 7 pages. And we also go through the point definition scoring. So the self-scoring piece, we talk about that as well. Okay, so I don't want to take too much time sitting on this right now, though, because we have many things to discuss. So we talked about the submissions. We talked about the calendar review. We're going to add that date for the 10th. So let's go on to the next one. Okay. So population definition per development. So what we did in our allocation plan is we left the population open. Okay. So to allow us, okay, if you have time to answer today, I just wanted to clarify that the narrative for this application will be due in phase 2 based on the webinar date. So that is correct. Tiffany, you are correct in your assumption. Awesome. So population definition per development. We understand that each of your applications and your developments are going to serve certain populations, and that is fine. Both for the non-congregate shelter as well as the tax credit version, it's okay to have those population definitions. It may be with the tax credit rental housing portion, though, which I know this is not what we're focusing on here, so I'm not going to go into it too deep. You're going to need to make sure that there's a specific reasoning behind your tenant definitions, because with a non-congregate shelter, serving specific populations is one thing, but when you're actually placing people in a location that has a lot, it's basically a apartment complex, having specific definitions, you're going to have to really back that up if you're using those units for a certain population. So, okay. So that is, I saw you, Jim, so let me finish this statement. So that is what that's what we really need to kind of take a look at, but that's a 2024 question to really delve into. So I'm going to pause it right there. So for the non-congregate shelter piece, what we are going to be focusing on is, yes, you can definitely show us what populations you want to serve. And that can be people who are homeless. That can be, I know that there's a lot of people talking about women and children, domestic violence and VAWA, veterans. Those are all specific populations that you can serve in your shelters. Okay. 2, we have a question as far as defining non-congregate shelter. For the purpose of this grant, it's a shelter that serves individuals who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, that they are in a single room, similar to a motel room. So they have their own door and they have a bathroom. Okay. And so those are the 2 main components that you need to have. A kitchen is optional, except they need to have an opportunity to use a kitchen. So it needs to be in some sort of community type setting or in their unit. Okay. You cannot charge rent for those units. They have to be able to be there for free, which is why we're talking about the operating costs today. If you do charge something, it has to be very, 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 very minimal, because these are individuals who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Okay. So Jim, does that answer your question? Just nod your head. Okay, great. Awesome, yay, okay. Let's talk about coordinated entry, the VI SPDATs. You guys can click on this. I've already clicked on it, and so we're going to talk about that. We had a question about the VI SPDAT. We recommended that you move into looking at training for the VI SPDAT. This is the HMIS page. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, that's a homeless management information system. Client track is what we use as the input system that we have, the database for our homeless management. Okay, so shelter, it's a shelter. We're going to be using homeless management system because we should be working with homeless people since it's a shelter. So that's where my associations are coming from. And so therefore, for the VI SPDAT, if you're not used to working with this particular program, we would like for you to start looking at this webpage. Okay. They do have training materials, but for some reason, the connection is not on the website at this time. So I got to figure out where you can get where you can get connected to that. However, I wanted to show down here under forms, all different intake options are here, okay? So for those of you who are needing to kind of get into this and know more about it because you're not familiar with our coordinated entry system and our homeless management information system, this is where you can start, okay? Start looking at these forms. These are the intake forms to use when establishing your shelter if you don't have one already, okay? So, and the VI SPDAT, it's going to be more of the federal piece. I believe it's right here. But basically, it's a vulnerability index, okay? And so I know just enough to kind of basically talk about it, but what I'll do is for our services section of this training, I'll bring in someone from the Office of Homeless and Special Needs to talk about it. Do you have to use all of these forms or just the ones that are appropriate? Just the ones that are appropriate, not all the forms. Yes, good question. Okay. Next. Does the agency have to be in our community? We have a mentoring agency, but they are in another state. I'm assuming that would work. Is that correct? We would probably need a little bit more information for this question. If you are having supportive services, obviously they need to be local to understand how to support the people who are in your program. If you have an overall mentoring agency, so like a Salvation Army that's connected to a larger scope, that's possible, but obviously there's also local agencies. If there is a program outside of the state that wants to have something here in Georgia now, that may be something we may need to discuss because we need you to be able to have local connections in order to serve the individuals in the shelter. So we would need to know more information in order to make sure that the shelter is being used to help the local population receive the services from the shelter. So I hope that answers that question for the most part. Again, we may need some more information. And what I'm going to talk about in this too is utilizing those files that we have in the overall submission in order to explain these particulars that would help support your reasoning behind applying for the money. Okay. And then the application self-scoring review, we already talked about that. Okay, so these are the posted questions. We're going to go ahead and re-up what's on the website already and kind of answer these online as well. Please look back at that form section and put your questions in there so that way everyone can benefit from these. This is a closed time. We can't really go into great detail on outside of this setting to answer these questions, okay? Because we can't do as many one-on-one talks with regards to non-congregate shelter at this time. We can for tax credit and rental housing, but not about non-congregate shelter. I'm gonna sit here. Do you have any use of the, okay, we already talked about that. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? I hope I explained that well. Jody, did I do okay with that? Was I clear? Okay, good. Because I was getting kind of tied up in my brain. Okay, we're moving on. Awesome. Okay, 21. Oh, we have a question coming in. We're going to talk about organizational budgets in a second. Okay, while Doug's typing, I'll go ahead and do some general. So organizational budgets. I'm actually going to break out the organizational budget so we can walk through that. I also have some examples on there that can help you know specifically what we're looking for. Some really important things to consider when putting together the budget of your organization. Now, the whole reason why we did this is the second is, okay, so we talked about the data and your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, okay? And doing an overview of your programming and your organization, okay? Taking a look at if a non-congregate shelter is really something that's really good for you, if it's in line with your mission, if it's in line with what you're doing. So doing an overall kind of minor strategic plan and having the data to back up, back it up. So if you're serving, so for example, what we found with some of the data that we've looked at is there's, for domestic violence, there's a high concentration of individuals who are having domestic violence kind of situations in North Georgia in the east. Like there's the way that the again, that was weird. We might cover this in the presentation. What organization occurred or submit a preliminary architecture. Yes, I can cover that for you, Doug. So just I'll cover that probably towards the end. Jody, my computer just said I may have to restart. So if I lose you, I'll be back on in just a second. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to this. So with the organizational budget piece, you want to make sure that's the next step. So let's take a look at our organization. This is what we're doing right now. And then we're going to add this new building. So that means we're going to have to start paying for lights for that building. We're going to have to make sure that everything is set up to pay for additional staff possibly for that building. Any additional, needs as far as food for more people there, those types of things. We want to look at you being able to take your organization and expand it to include this non-congregate shelter. Okay, now remember, for the non-congregate shelter funding, this does not include organizational costs. It's bricks and sticks. So we can help you build it, but we need to make sure that you'll be able to maintain this for the requirement of 10 to 15 years. If it's a rehab, if you're taking a building, shifting it up, and then being able to have people live there after that, whether you're using it now or not using it now, that's 10 years that you need to be operating it as a non-congregate shelter. If you're building it new from the ground up, then that is going to be 15 years that you need to operate it as a non-congregate shelter. So what we're going to look at today is the numbers that you have behind it to say, yes, we will be able to operate this part of the non-congregate shelter for the next 15 years. Okay, so we want you to look at that at the beginning because we're very cool with you going through every one of these trainings, but if your organization may need a little bit of time in order to make that non-congregate shelter happen, because you need to build up your organizational capacity in order to make it good, that is something to consider seriously, okay? So that's why we're offering these trainings as we are, so then that way you can kind of see if this is something for you or not. Okay, so we definitely want to consider the full thing. Okay, so let's just putting that out there. So like it says here, go back to your planning and goals. Does the non-congregate shelter fit within your agency's goals? Is this so for example, if you are doing employment services and that's all you're doing, and suddenly you're moving into shelter services, that expertise may have some transferable knowledge as far as having helping people with employment, but an organization who has done sheltering services for a long period of time is going to have a lot more transferable skills to really move into that non-congregate shelter piece. So does it fit in with what you're doing? Do you have the approval and backing of all of your champions? Talking about your board members. Is your board on board? Are there other agencies that you could partner with? And is your community on board? So all of those pieces are things to consider. And Jim, I saw your question. I'll get to you in just a second. And then get your estimates of your budget as close as you can. So obviously, when you're looking ahead, the budget is not always going to be exact, but we do want you to give us the best numbers that you possibly can. Okay, so in some cases you can be completely exact, and in other cases you can't. So we're going to take a look at that. Estimate what you need at least for a year. So what are your available resources? what are the people hours needed. So as far as your staff and things, taking a good look at maybe increasing staff or shifting staff to another part of your agency. Obviously for the non-congregate shelter, what are the material costs that you're going to be needing? And then planning for those contingencies. So 5%, 10% of your budget for the problem solving piece, because as you know, things are going to come up. And so if you need, well, we can talk about that in a second. So there may be really big needs that you need to plan for in order to ensure that you can cover all the costs. Does your proposed income cover your expenses? So reviewing your current funding compliance and see if it will cover the new shelter. Will your funding sources be allowed to cover a HUD shelter? So remember, this is HUD, so we're going to be doing HUD compliance for the shelter for the next 15 years. So that's what we're going to be reviewing. So sometimes some of the funding sources may not cover what you're going to be doing with the shelter. So take a look at compliance with your current funding if you're going to use it for the shelter for operating. Can they work back and forth? Okay, so check in those compliance pieces. Can you apply expenses from your current efforts to your non-congregate shelter? So we've talked with several agencies and organizations that have stated, you know what, this is just an add-on to what we're already doing. So, you know, the staff, we don't necessarily have to increase too much staff. Don't overrun don't overload your staff either, though, just saying. But, you know, we could easily translate a lot of what we're doing now into a new building. And so that is great. So really look at what you can transfer over as well. So it's a both ways. It's not just more increasing costs, but maybe even leveraging more costs. Maybe this will actually decrease some costs because you're not having to put it into hotel and motel vouchers or something like that. And then making sure all of your financial sheets match. Okay. So when we look at this information, if we look at your audits, if we look at your financials, your regular financials on a monthly basis, and then the budget that you give us, do all of those components make sense? So do you have similar grants between everything? Do you have, is the cost of your staffing pretty much the same between everything? So make sure that everything is very fluid and makes sense between the big picture, because if there is a hole or a gap, that's going to raise a flag for us. And so we're going to be like, what's not consistent here? So just make sure that everything makes sense throughout all of your documentation. Okay, so I finished that. 15 years of money now, or just be able to justify that we will have enough yearly to maintain the organization. You need to justify that you'll have enough on an annual basis to maintain the organization. So you do not have to have all 15 years in the bank. Nope, you don't need to do that, but you do need to show that you can maintain it for sure. But you need to show that you can maintain it without charging rent. Okay, so you can't charge rent to the individuals who are in those units. So, so we've had a lot of different conversations regarding permanent supportive housing. And I actually just briefly had one today too. So I know a lot of agencies have done more of a permanent supportive housing where individuals are able to contribute based on they may be receiving Social Security disability, or they're receiving funding from another program, or things like that. You need to show that you're being able to fund the operations outside of the individual paying for it. Okay, so if we need to discuss that a little bit more, then that is fine. But just we can go into that a little bit deeper if we need to, and we may have a lot of raised hands as we go along. So, which is great. So, okay. So let's talk about the forms. I'm going to pause there real quick. Are there any questions regarding what I just talked about that I haven't answered already? And actually what I can do is, for Doug, your question is, will organizations be required to submit a preliminary architectural recommendation or a preliminary engineering recommendation? Will HOME-ARP funds cover that? That is going to be more in the the presentation on the non-congregate shelter development. That's in 2 weeks on the 27th. So we're really going to be covering those development specs. And yes, I believe with what you're asking, yes, we would be able to, that would be considered kind of like a soft cost. It is relevant to the development. So yes, HOME-ARP funds could cover that. Okay, but you cannot, here's the kicker though. We need to know if it's something that can be paid for now and then asked for reimbursement. That may not be able to happen. So you may need to wait on some of those pieces beforehand. So and I know that is weird with the timing with the application. So let me put a pin in that question and then we'll go back to it starting next week, okay? And that way I can get you some more answers on that too. Okay, let's move on to this piece. Okay, so let's talk about the actual budget here and the documents, okay? So the structure of, I'm gonna do this as a quick training too. So the packet has all of these different files, and what you'll do when you submit is you're gonna zip up these 4 files and they're gonna have your completed information in it, okay? It's gonna be your completed Excel workbook for each section, and then the additional documents that you need to submit to us, okay? So looking at operation budget, right now we're looking at this workbook here, okay? And so all of the audits that we're going to ask for need to be put into this file for the last 3 years. And then your additional budget documentation goes into number 2, okay? So here's your checklist, your operating budget Excel spreadsheet which is this. Your last 3 years of financial audits for your organization. You're going to need to provide your recent financial statements. So it's going to be like bank statements and things like that, most recent. Your funding commitment for the duration of the restricted use period, such as your commitment letters or term sheets. So if you have any different grants and such that you're working with that you're for sure to get money from, that's what we're talking about. And then if you have any litigations or bankruptcies in the past 7 years. Now, I know that it's like, oh my gosh, you know, if you guys have had issues come up, okay, that's fine. But just explain. Again, writing a letter, explaining the situation around any litigation or bankruptcy, and how it's going to impact the non-congregate shelter in the future. So we understand that things happened, and some things are out of your control and some things aren't, or are, or whatever. You guys know what I'm trying to say. And so just make sure that you're just explaining to us your reasoning behind it, okay? So moving into the operations portion. So this is going to be your income. Essentially, what we've done through the whole, through all of the budgets is we've tried to be as exhaustive as possible. While I was doing these examples, I found out that it wasn't quite as exhaustive as I wanted it to be, but we wanted it to be as exhaustive as possible. So what we're looking at is first your current annual income. Now, if this is going to translate into your non-congregate shelter funding, if you're receiving, for example, this Continuum of Care grant, and it's going to translate into this, as far as your non-congregate shelter, we need you to add to that. So if that means that you are suddenly going to have an increase, or if, I feel like I'm going down the wrong way, okay. Essentially what this is doing is we're seeing where you're currently at, and we're seeing where you're going to make the additions in order to cover the additional costs with the non-congregate shelter. Okay, so first, you're going to want to go through all of your income for your current programming and what you're doing with your agency currently. Okay, And then we need to see where you're going to be adding to it. So for this section here, it could quite possibly be all the same. Okay. And you're starting then to maybe do a specific fundraising event. So you're working with, maybe you're having a great big gala or a dinner. That's just what's coming to my mind right now. And a silent auction. Now, for those of you who may have a thrift store, you may have other options. Maybe you're doing online direct marketing and you're getting individual donations, those types of things. It could be almost anything. You can get a United Way grant. So there could be a lot of different ways that you're increasing this. And then you add to this your new budget, and let's just say it was a smash and awesome, and you're able to use $10,000 a month, and it comes out to, nope, too many zeros, $120,000, yeah, for the year. Okay, so I hope I have the math right. Okay, so what we want to do is see where you're increasing. So we want to see what you're doing right now, and then to see how that's going to translate into the non-congregate shelter funding. And I know that Evan has a really great question coming in. Should we type our questions, or would it be all right to turn off mute and ask when called upon? If you want to go ahead and unmute right now, Evan, you go right ahead, because I know you're going to ask a good one. Hope I can answer it.
Wow, Alana. Okay, no pressure there. So I was, looking at this, like the gala, for instance, or, some of these, like United Way funding or things like that. Some of these things may not necessarily be written in stone, or it's going to be projections, or it could be projections,
Right.
So I'm wondering, to what degree, like, say, okay, we've got a SAMHSA grant, and we'll do that, and then we're going to apply for United Way funding, and then we're going to host this fundraiser, and we intend to raise $50,000 with that. We can say that and put that in there. What kind of documentation are you guys looking or expecting associated with that, if that's something that we're projecting in the future but may not necessarily be written in stone? Does that question make sense?
That makes a ton of sense, and it's a really good question. See, I knew you'd come through. So what I'm going to say to that is that when you're completing this, okay, so you're United Way, that's perfect. Okay, so for this, again, we made these forms very flexible. Okay, so you can alter them easily. We have not locked anything, and that was kind of on purpose. Okay, actually not kind of, it was on purpose, because we wanted you to be able to really tell your story and not be confined. Okay, but on the flip side, for those of you who are shifting things up, which I said is totally fine, you want to make sure, now you have to remember, we're going to be looking at, hopefully, depending on how many people apply, 10, 15, 20 different applications. Okay, so consistency is key, so we can read what you're trying to tell us. Okay, so for the great example that Evan gave for the United Way, you can put here applying for grant and tentative. Okay, so you can add those pieces, and then you can put the type of grant, and I know that they have community. I actually don't remember the specific, like a community grant, and how much you're applying for this. And it could be $15,000. Well, let's do it $15,000 for the whole. Okay. And then what you would do here is create a formula, super easy, equals this one divided by 12. Okay. So you can make those changes, but again, I would caution you to be deleting United Way and putting something completely different there, because you're going to want to have us looking consistently at every single thing so we know what we're looking for. Okay. So if you start mixing stuff up, it's going to be harder for us to read for 10, 15, 20 different applications. Okay. But you can add to it. So if there's a tentative piece, go ahead and add that. Down here at the bottom, there's also a whole host of additional ones that you can add to as far as what's going to be available for you to, add your own flair to. And we know that there's many different ways that agencies are making money. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And actually,
Okay.
yeah, I was looking at the other income stuff, and because we would be billing, Medicaid or potentially state
Right.
contracted services too. And I was going to put that down in the other income
Yes.
category as far as the projected rates based on the volume of services, et cetera,
Yes.
there. I have another question though, and feel free to say if you can't answer this, but
Okay.
do you guys have a are you guys going to be determining award based upon the number of tentative versus non-tentative guaranteed funding that we have to say, like, if I'm listing all of this as tentative, like we plan to go after Georgia Power and United Way and Coca-Cola Foundation, and then we're going to do this massive fundraiser, we're going to do all of this stuff, and it's something that's sort of out there, we don't it's not guaranteed, so all of the stuff is tentative. Is that going to weigh into your determination of award or not? And if you can't answer that, I'm fully understanding.
It's a really good question, Evan. As far as that goes, okay, so let's put it this way. Okay, if we're looking at two different applications, okay, the one who has for sure funding versus not for sure funding, yeah, that could play a role. However, I also know that there are agencies that have some longevity and have been able to go through a lot of different financial situations and are able to look for different options, and it works out. Okay, so showing that you have the capacity to really land on your feet with new programming, I think that also plays a big part. And we have a storm coming in, so if you can hear that, I'm sorry. So I think that it's a yes, it's a both.
Yeah,
I think it is going to play. It's going to play. So we're going to be ranking those, and that's going to go to the self-scoring that we're talking about. Okay,
Sure.
So I think that yes, the tentative piece is definitely is not going to rank as high as someone who has for sure. If they have a a billionaire person who comes in and gives them $10 million a year, phenomenal. We all want that person's number, and then that's great if they have definitive for sure money. However, if your agency has been around for a long time and you've been able to manage to apply for a lot of different grants, and even though they're tentative, we've received them, and showing that you have a history of being able to secure funding, that's probably a better way to state it. That is something that you can show too. Again, we've mentioned before, if this means that maybe you have 10 things that you have tentative to put into the non-congregate shelter, write a narrative and put it in the file stating, here's the tentative funding that we have. And we've shown that, 9 times out of 10, you're usually able to get the funding because of, we have a history of being able to secure funding. So if you can show to us, and this is, if you can show to us in a narrative that, yes, it may be tentative, but this is why it's secure, that's another thing too. Because the thing is, just real quick, because we know that nothing is for sure and funding changes all the time. And so if you can show that you can bounce back and problem solve with the funding issues, that to us is really good proof that there's a, that we can help build a shelter and you can make it go for the next 15 years. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And yeah, that's well answered. Good answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, we're trying. So, okay. So is that your only question? Do you have another
That's
question?
it. That's all
Okay.
I've got.
Cool. Thanks. Okay. Are there any other questions out there since we're kind of paused? Okay. I am moving on to the operation and expenses because we have about 15 minutes left. Okay, so let's talk expenses. Okay. Again, this is just to let you know, general logistics, the totals are up here. They'll all add up here. And then this section, they'll all add here. And then this is the totals between the two. Okay. So with this, if we're looking at the grant portion, okay. So for this, I included some areas where some of the funds were captured in this example, different kinds of housing programs. So some through the Office of Homeless and Special Needs, some through HUD, some through DHS. We have LIHEAP, we have ESG funding, we have continuum of care funding. So I'm trying to create, I was using an example from a different state actually. And so with this, okay, showing that you're distributing hotel motel vouchers, rapid rehousing, heating bill assistance, okay? So when we look at the operation expenses, they need to match. Here's your rapid rehousing case manager. Here's another full-time, case management, full-time case manager, LIHEAP assistance and what you've paid for. And as you can see, it's minus that $500 because that was recaptured. The $1,000 because that was, you didn't spend out the whole thing. So making sure again that all of the information matches. Okay, so for your income to your expenses to the grants that you're stating, make sure that it all kind of is seamless. Okay. I want to leave some time to go over other things. I mean, have more questions. So we can go back to this, but again, this is pretty, it's pretty basic. The activities are what you're doing. The objectives are what you want to obtain at the end of it. So reducing homelessness, reduce bills of local residents, assist residents to avoid homelessness, those kinds of things, okay, to show us what you're doing. Because I know objectives and activities can get a little confusing at times. These do have drop downs. So here's a logistics thing too. We have home, CHIP, CDBG, ESG, and HOPWA. Those are housing type grants. If you have other grants that are relevant to this, go ahead and be sure to just do other and then fill in this blank here about what it is. The current years are good. If you want to go back a number of years, that's fine. Again, to show that longevity, you guys can go on forever with this if you'd like to. If you could have the most recent ones up top and the least recent ones down here, that would be great. And then we also have this one that is housing type assistance and then other, okay? So that could be, again, other relevant programming. The amount you were funded, and then if there were any remaining balances. So logistics, let me go back here because I want to make sure, or no, here. These little red dots here mean that there's going to be a note. So sales tax refunds, and there was an explanation for that. So look for these little red tabs. The other thing is that if there's not enough, if you need to add another other, I would recommend inserting the others right above instead of changing this. So let's just say you guys don't do any of these things, but you need to add something because this isn't what you're doing. I would add an other instead of deleting one of these. So then that way we know that nothing is missing, okay? And then the good thing about doing something like this, and then you go ahead and put the other information in. If you double click here, you'll see that the sum includes what you just added. Okay. So that we're at 151. Okay, and we're going to talk about scoring on August 10th now. So let me go back here. We talked about all of these different things. So the biggest takeaways, because I want to leave at least a few minutes to answer any more questions that we have, and I can go back to any of these worksheets if you'd like me to. Be sure to plan. Does the development fit into your organization's structure financially? Is this something, is a new building and everything that's involved with that new building, is that something that you guys can handle financially? That's a really big discussion that you need to have, okay? Making sure, again, everything matches and makes sense. Your audits, your monthly financials, your budget, do all of them paint the picture of what you do, okay? And does it all make sense? Does everything point to each other in all of your documentation? This information tells a story. If you need to bring background information in, like Evan and I talked about, upload it to the file, okay? That's why there's that budget other file. If you need to explain something, please explain it, okay? The documents are flexible on purpose. Add what you need, but keep the overall structure, like I showed with, with adding the other row. That way you can keep the sum, and that doesn't, it doesn't shift it, because sometimes you want to make sure that everything adds up the way it should. So make sure you're checking those pieces with Excel. DCA staff need to be able to read and understand everything that you're doing. So explaining those acronyms, and please don't use agency-specific jargon, because we don't, like, for example, I went to a college out in Washington State and we talked about the loop. Well, you guys wouldn't know what the loop is. You would have no clue. And so it's the loop around the hole where everyone would walk, and you would go out into the loop and people would play Frisbee and stuff like that. Ultimate Frisbee, that probably dates me. So using agency-specific jargon is not a good thing. And then asking questions. So like you guys are asking questions here, it's perfect because it helps everyone. So at that, I am going to say, check us out online. I don't know, you all should have all these websites. So I'm going to leave this up. Questions. We have about 6 minutes left. Are there any other questions? I would recommend that you guys unmute just to save time, or you can type too. That's absolutely fine. Do you want me to go back to any of the worksheets? Okay. Form on our website to ask questions. We can cover it here, and we'll also leave those comments online. If you have that you want to do for rental assistance, we're taking those now. And we'll be talking about actually Samantha Carvalho, who is our division director. She's going to be on next week and the week after to talk about developments with us. And so we're going to be talking about federal compliance, which is super important. So please be on. And then we're going to also talk about, Doug, we're going to answer your question about those development budgets the week after and how that gets all couched together. So, so that is that. I think we're at 1:56. So we have about 4 minutes left. I think, okay, can you guys hear me now? Okay. Okay. My friend Jack usually counts to 30 for 30 seconds before we officially end. Okay. Going. Okay, we're done then. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. Again, let us know if you need anything. We can't have conversations about non-congregate shelter unless the only thing we could talk about are general HOME-ARP things and then rental housing. So please ask your questions in these forums or online in the forum, okay? Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day. And if you're in South Georgia or actually throughout the state, be safe because we are having a lot of storms. So have a great day. Thanks. Bye.